Welcome everyone to the Emergent Essence Dynamics webinar number 11. It is August 7th and the theme today is ending the victim cycle, which is a very, very large topic which goes far and wide. We only have an hour, so I'm going to try and keep it focused onto the essentials. We have joining us here Paul and Dieter, and we may have a couple more joining as well. So welcome everyone to the webinar. I hope you're all doing well.
Right, yes.
Let me know very briefly, what's attracting you today to this webinar, this theme? What did you have in mind of what you think you're going to learn or get, or what you want to learn? I can hear from each of you just briefly.
So liberating personal power without sacrificing the heart is on topic for me right now, because I try to, or I'm looking for a way to make career or like do the usual stuff while really being in it.
Okay.
Like having the will and the feeling for it like kind of combined.
Okay.
So yeah.
Great. Dieter?
So yeah, I'm here because I wanted to attend all the free webinars you're offering. So, so it's not, yeah, it's especially for this topic. But it sounds interesting. I have no opinion yet.
No opinion, but you say especially for this topic. So what's the interest, passion, or fascination here for you? If there's anything you can grab from yourself there.
I think it sounds like a common phenomenon, the cycle. So if we circle, let's say, in a kind of mode that is the victim mode. So that's what I'm associating with the topic right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I have to say up front is this can go very deep. It can become very confusing and complex, okay? Because the victim cycle goes around and around and around. I will be explaining how it just perpetuates itself, and it can be very difficult to try to break it or get out of it, because as soon as we think we're getting out of it, we're back in it, all right? But there are ways out. So I'm going to give as simple an overview as I can. But if you're expecting like, okay, can I get the solution by the end of an hour? It's really not going to happen, all right? But I am giving pointers along the way on how you can get yourself on track to neutralizing this cycle. Now, a full reconciliation, forgiveness, dissolving the cycle, all of that, that demands more than an hour. And that actually is what the Reconciling Conflict course is focused on, all right, is moving into those reconciliation processes. And we work more in depth with this victim-persecutor cycle. However, so I'm just saying that up front for you guys and those listening to the recording, okay? I am not making a promise that all your lives are going to be solved and saved in an hour. Okay, because this is a cycle that has existed in our humanity for thousands of years. Okay, all right. So it's very, very, very embedded. So why I chose this topic is it's actually very, very, very timely right now when we look around at what's happening with self-help industry, with coaching, the way leadership is oriented, the way politics are going. And there's so much more and more with the global changes, and there's so much more polarization happening. And the victim mentality and this victim-persecutor cycle is becoming so polarized and transparent right now that it's becoming confusing on how to navigate ourselves through it. What I see, and I'll just put this up front, is we are on the brink of transcending this cycle, but we need to understand it in order to do that. Or we can put ourselves right back in, okay? I'll explain that shortly, what I mean by that. Any comments on that, what I've just said? I've made some bold statements there.
Oh, it's nice having like a more geopolitical point of view added to that.
Yeah. Yeah, so this doesn't, I mean, it applies to personal growth. It applies to leadership, coaching, mediation, but it also applies to what's happening globally, cosmically, etc. Okay, so I'm seeing a whole wave happening just in the last 2-3 years of this really coming to the surface now. So we're looking at what are we discovering today, all right? Basically, we all want love, power, and strength, okay? We all want to be recognized, validated, admired. We want to belong. We also want to have power, control, sovereignty, all right? The problem we experience is how do we love without becoming a victim? How do we love and be vulnerable without becoming a victim or being victimized? And how do we show power and strength without becoming a persecutor? So how do we reconcile those two together? That is the main focus here, is how do we reconcile compassion with power, being heartfelt with exercising control, okay? So the two don't seem to fit together, all right? I'll explain how that happens shortly. So what we're exploring are some basic questions that will help us reconcile both roles of victim and persecutor. And these questions can help us release ourselves from this cycle. It doesn't guarantee a release, but it helps us make steps towards that. So how do we hold power and authority without losing our heart and connection, okay? How do we keep our heart open and vulnerable without losing strength and power? So we're also looking at what are the opportune moments to break the cycle. If we start recognizing what the cycle is, what are the windows of opportunity to break it or continue it? And what does it demand of us to dissolve this cycle and truly liberate ourselves, meaning to transcend it, all right? These are not easy questions to answer, all right? So what we'll do is we're gonna go through an overview of what the victim-persecutor cycle is, and we're gonna look closely at what our relationship is to power and to validation. The victim has a very unique relationship to power and validation. The persecutor has a very unique relationship to power and validation. They do not look at power and validation in the same way, and they do not treat it in the same way, okay? Once we understand how they're both treating power and validation, we can understand more where they're coming from, and then we can understand how they function together, all right? So we want to look at what's driving this cycle and then what it will demand of ourselves to break free of it, all right? And once we're looking at that cycle, what drives it, we can look at the various traps we can get into that will perpetuate that cycle. And I'm looking in particular, when we're pursuing transformation, coaching, leadership, fulfillment, or empowerment, whether that be self-empowerment or empowering others, there are traps that could have us fall back into this victim-persecutor cycle where it becomes false empowerment or false transformation or false fulfillment, rather than true resilience and autonomy, which helps lift us out of that cycle. And so I will show you some simple ways. I have one main simple way for us to work on ourselves. This is not about now we're going to go and deal with all our persecutors and victims around us. This is more on how can we recognize our own victim-persecutor cycle within ourselves and start creating resilience and well-being in ourselves, so we can begin to make an internal reconciliation between our own internal role of victim and persecutor. So that's very different than going out and solving your lives outside of yourselves, solving the world outside of yourselves. One thing EED stresses very much is that we reconcile within first, and then there is a natural ripple effect where we are capable of reconciling things externally around us. Any questions there on what I've said or comments?
Try what I was thinking about. You see the, let's say the two what do you call it,
Polar opposites, yeah.
Yeah, the extremes of so victim persecutor.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reminded of that triad I heard from another coaching school, I think, with
the victim oppressor triangle or something like that, right?
Yeah, there's a kind of a hero figure trying to solve that in the external world, to solve that polarization, or to help the victim in order to push away the persecutor, and the drama triangle. Yeah,
the drama triangle. Yes,
that was what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So, is there any connection to that model, or is what you're telling, or
there is? And when I start to explain the polarity between victim persecutor and how they're each treating power and validation, it will make sense how the two of them will create this triangle, because they're both pulling in a mediator, whether that be a rescuer or a hero or someone. They're both pulling someone to be on their side to justify their role, basically. Okay, that becomes really important when you are doing a reconciliation process between two people and they're caught in this victim persecutor cycle, because they will pull you into that triangle as facilitator. And this is why in EED we stress clean facilitation. We give you this clean, what is it to be a clean facilitator? And you'll get pulled into either guru expert or the fixer helper or the rescuer savior, right? And so that role as facilitator is the third piece, right, in that drama triangle. Okay. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I'm not really going to go into the drama triangle too much, because that will apply more to when, say, the victim and persecutor are trying to battle something out, retaliate, or reconcile. They're pulling in that third person, okay, as a witness, so to speak, is what I'll say. What I'm doing is what's going on between the two of them themselves, okay? Because really, that's what they need to work out. I think I'm going to make a claim. Some people may disagree, but that drama triangle is just a way of perpetuating the cycle. It's not a way of dissolving or solving the cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what they're telling. They are all caught in the triangle.
Yeah, they're all caught.
Yeah.
Okay. By understanding the victim-persecutor polarity, you'll learn how not to get caught in that triangle. Okay, great. Anything else to say before I move on here? Okay. Very quickly, what is EED? We do this in all our webinars, okay? So it's for the sake of those who have never attended or who are listening to recordings of EED webinars for the first time. So EED is based upon fractal patterns, fractal cycles, and it has a holistic approach, which means fractals are core repeating patterns that appear on all levels, from the smallest level to the biggest level. All right. When we can identify a fractal pattern, it has a ripple effect from the smallest level to the biggest level, which makes it far easier to solve multiple issues at once. All right. So basically, what happens in one place happens everywhere. Okay. And it's holistic, meaning we don't isolate areas of a person or a person's life. Everything is intricately connected. All right. What we're working on is the most fundamental level, driving human dynamics. This means we're working on relationships, whether it's with an individual, a relationship, or a group. Each person is in relationship with something at all times, and it's the dynamic that's driving their thoughts and behaviors and actions. So rather than try to change somebody's thoughts, behaviors, or actions, we're looking at shifting the dynamic itself, all right? How do we shift the dynamic? We first restore resilience, well-being, and autonomy in a person, which has them release the fear that is driving the dynamic, and then the resilience itself will take care of the transformation. So what we're really doing is we're reconciling ego with essence or source. Okay, what we mean by essence is the permanent nature of the person, the most resilient version of this person. And the ego is more a fear-driven identity or personality. We're reconciling the two together so that fear is neutralized. We're not eliminating fear, but the person has more autonomy over themselves. They have more agility. That means it liberates them to be a creative being. And when they're resilient with autonomy, nothing is taboo. Therefore, the ego is not entirely in control, but they can use the ego as a vehicle to create. So what we're really doing is an alchemical process. We're not focused on transformation, but rather transmutation. We're taking everything that's there and transmuting it into like it's being reorganized so that it is reconnected to essence. And therefore it reorganizes itself to express itself in the most pure and highest level that it can, as opposed to being distorted. How does that sound? Okay.
Sounds good. It sounds good. If you, one more sentence regarding transformation, the difference between transmutation, I get that the let's say the analogy, it's more like alchemy. It's all there.
It's all there, meaning the solution is already there, along with the problem. Yeah. So if we reorganize what's going on, the solution appears. It's not like, sometimes transformation is treated like we have to eliminate this, cut that out, introduce this.
Okay.
And that is more like a manipulation. Okay. So what's not on here on the slide is that EED comes from total acceptance before changing anything. And some forms or methodologies of transformation are actually coming from non-acceptance, which is just aggravating non-resilience. And then that means we're just putting Band-Aids and doing surgeries on everything, cutting things out, adding things in, because we're not accepting what's really there. And what we're not seeing is just because something looks like shit does not mean it's not gold. Okay? So, and alchemy is turn the lead into gold. Take the coarse substance and transmute it into its most pure and highest form, okay? This is what we mean by transmutation. So we're not focused on changing anything. The first thing is acceptance, build resilience, which creates autonomy and well-being, and then it naturally reorganizes itself, all right? So this applies to coaching, leadership, mediation, facilitation, healing, energy work, even sales. It can be applied everywhere where we're using relationship. Okay, great. Now, what is the victim-persecutor? And it is our most timeless drama. Okay, this is thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So here's how it works. Everyone is born innocent. I don't think there ever has been a baby born with a dagger in its hand, okay? Or a sword in its hand, all right? Everyone is born innocent. And then as we go through life, we learn about what it is to stay safe and secure, what it is to win love, security, and take control, all right? So a baby is absolutely vulnerable, absolutely powerless, but pure. full of heart, full of love. So in a way, we are all born as a victim. We start as a victim. It's not because we've been victimized, but it is because we are set up to be vulnerable. Does this make sense what I'm saying? Okay, innocence, okay? Then as we go through life, through difficulties, challenges, punishment, learning rules and boundaries, we will feel persecuted, right? And then we make choices on how do we survive those bumps in the road, all right? So what we're doing is, as we slowly gain power, we're moving closer and closer to becoming what we could call a persecutor. Okay? A victim is full of heart. To make it very, very simplified, a persecutor is full of power. They are opposites of each other. All right? So as we gain power, we're moving closer and closer to being a potential persecutor. And then we can cross a line and become the persecutor, which creates another victim. You cannot be a persecutor without a victim. And in a way, you cannot be a victim without becoming a persecutor. This is what creates the cycle. So then we can move all the way around from having full power, and then as we gradually let power go, we are moving ourselves back into the potential victim, okay? And it can go around and around and around, all right? So this is a polarity, a battle between heart, which is feeling, connection, emotion, compassion, and power, which is control, power, anger, aggression, authority. You can equate all those words here with the sword, okay? So, and I'll show you how the victim uses heart and its relationship to power, and how the persecutor uses the sword and its relationship to heart, okay? Now, that's the cycle that can go around and around. So what's happening here is the victim is driven by their heart. They want to feel validated. They need to connect, all right? So they're constantly driven by validation. What that means is they're always asking the question, do I exist? Do I exist? Do I exist? Because through connection, we get the validation. Oh, yes, I exist. Oh, yes, I belong. Oh, yes, you recognize me, okay? The persecutor is driven by power in order to control and to feel secure. So the persecutor knows it exists. It just wants to make sure it can maintain its existence by controlling everything around it. When it is secure, it makes sure that it will exist. Do you guys understand the difference here? Okay. So the persecutor has been a victim. So it's asking, do I exist? Do I exist? Do I exist? Okay, yes, I know I exist. Now I need to make sure I will exist. Okay. And then eventually it learns, oh, I can let go of that control. But then it's like, well, if I really let it go, will I exist? And then it's going to go back around again. Okay. So the victim-persecutor cycle, here's the basic conclusion here is, when we're on that cycle, it gives us the illusion that there is a sacrificial exchange between powerful authority and heartfelt connection. It gives us the illusion that we can have one or the other, but not both. Okay, and this gets purported in our social media, in our stories, in our history. There's these classic fairy tales of, well, you can have all the power and riches in the world, but you may lose respect, admiration, your best friends, your family. So you have to sacrifice that, you know, or you can give up all those riches and power and just live a simple life surrounded by love. That is a classic story that describes this victim-persecutor cycle. Does this make sense, what I'm saying here? Okay. So this is also why it appears difficult for some people to exercise their strength or power or authority, because they will feel, or they're made to feel, like they're losing love, admiration, recognition, or connection, or compassion. This is where they think power is cruel. Okay, if I need to say no and reject somebody, I'll feel bad. I might be a bad person. Okay, that's coming from the victim side. All right. And they'll see oppressors as, well, they have no problem firing a person because they don't care. They don't give a shit about this person or that person. They're really heartless. Okay. It's also why some people are afraid to be truly open and vulnerable, because they'll think, oh, now I'll get taken advantage of. I'm going to lose strength. I'm going to lose power and control. Somebody will have control over me if I open my heart and be vulnerable. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is how the persecutor feels. I will not be vulnerable because I will lose power. Okay. All right. So now, there is a line of forgiveness here. There is an opportune moment. Now, there are many opportune moments, but here's the main one. It is when the roles are about to flip, okay? When the victim is pushed so hard, okay, that it's about to cross that line. This is where the victim could gain enough power that it can retaliate or take revenge. All right. The moment the victim takes revenge and uses power, it becomes a persecutor. Many victims resist this, but they also unconsciously throw out these daggers and power, but they say, oh, no, 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 I'm still a victim. I'm still a victim. Okay. That's like that's part of the perpetual victim mentality, where they're actually persecuting, but claiming victimhood, okay? This is when they're really on the line, okay? The other opportune moment is when the persecutor is ready to let go of all power. And what they'll do is make a bid for forgiveness. Now, this is quite easy for them to do because they've been through the entire cycle. It's about to end. And so they'll make a bid of reconciliation. This is their window of reconciliation, okay? This is where they'll say, I've been wrong. I'm ready to pay for my deeds. It's when they give up all the power and they move themselves to the same level as the victim, and they actually accept the victim for who they are. And they begin to open their heart and say, I'm sorry, okay? Now, when that happens, it's very difficult for a victim to believe that, because they think, am I going to get tricked? Is this just another way to victimize me again? Or there's a transference of power and they'll rise up and say, now I have the opportunity to have my revenge, okay? Or I can now take control of the persecutor and hold them prisoner by withholding forgiveness, all right? So it takes both to break the cycle. Usually, the first bid for reconciliation will come from the persecutor because they're about to end. They're ready to step off. But what makes it very hard to reconcile is the victim then has a choice. Do I truly forgive and sacrifice having gone only around half the cycle and then let it go? Because they naturally want to complete their own cycle. The problem is if they choose to complete their own cycle, they're creating another victim and around they go. How are you guys doing with this information?
It's good.
Yeah.
Very plastic.
So to give a good metaphor and to sound a bit biblical, so you know the biblical expression, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. All right. This is about revenge and retaliation. That is what perpetuates the cycle. So the persecutor takes an eye from the victim. Then the victim comes around and says, I take your eye, and they flip roles. Okay. Then Jesus comes along and says, no, 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 forget those old rules. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. All right? Turn the other cheek. What do you mean, Jesus? Somebody took my eye. What do you mean, turn the other cheek? I'm not going to roll over and be a doormat. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
So what is really being talked about here is, in order to break the cycle, is so the persecutor took your eye. You see the persecutor has two eyes. And what you say is, fine, I let that go. I accept that you have two eyes. I accept that I have one eye, and we're done. I don't hold resentment, and I don't hold any desire to do anything more about this. We rip up the contract and we're done. Not so easy to do when you're walking around with one eye and they have two. That's what we mean by turn the other cheek. It does not mean let yourself be hit again. It just means drop the whole game. That demands resilience. It demands generosity. It demands faith. It also demands accountability. But most of all, it's the resilience and autonomy over oneself to be able to do that. And it's one of the most difficult things to do. And it actually goes against human nature because we naturally want to rebalance the scales, okay? It is hard to drop out of a cycle when it's half finished. Are you guys understanding? What are the, I mean, where does this take you? What are the implications of this when we look at it this way?
So where does it take me is I'm imagining or remembering situations in which I was about to flip towards a persecutor role. Mm-hmm. And I try to emphasize like how hard it was to not go that way. Mm-hmm. And trying to get a feel for that. Mm-hmm. And I try to check myself. And I get the feeling that it's a better choice to drop the game. It's a stronger way to go. On the other hand, it's really hard to check yourself on that.
Yeah, where you, it's like not just forgive, but forgive and forget, meaning no further pursuit. No further pursuit and no holding a grudge. It's
yeah, right. All right. On the other hand, you said demands that both sides drop their roles. So
that's right.
Has to also say, I'm not going to be the victim. So if they want to play another game, they might push me to be with the persecutor.
That's right. That's right. It takes both to do a true reconciliation and dissolve the game. Yeah.
And that really messes up the concept of someone is the evil one.
That's right.
It's like
that's right.
Both could be.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because what we're doing is we're stepping outside of a polarity. It's not about right, wrong, good, evil, right? If we're still thinking right, wrong, good, evil, we're still on that cycle. Okay. This is how we're totally dropping out of it and into an essence and a unity consciousness. Okay. And that's where the reconciliation takes place, is in this level of unity consciousness. Anything else to say or add, Dieter?
So I was thinking about my life, and for me, it's what it made difficult for me to break the cycle. So I think so. So it's logic. It sounds logic. Mm-hmm. I was always open to. So if I speak for myself, mm-hmm. I was always open to breaking the cycle. What made it difficult for me in growing up was how I was perceived by third or fourth parties. Mm-hmm. They were saying, okay, if you do that, you are weak, and you do as you are full of wisdom, but in the truth is you do not want to confront. Mm-hmm. So that made it difficult for me. So great. It was the harder part.
Yeah. This is great. What you're saying, this is exactly what we're moving into then, okay? Mm-hmm. How does the victim hold power? How does the persecutor hold vulnerability connection, okay? Okay, so what we need to do is look at everything functions on a polarity, all right? So what we're really doing is we're moving from emptiness to wholeness on a polarity. So and you can fill in the blank with anything you want. Okay, so this could be lack of power, full power. All right. So when I'm lacking power, I feel in danger. So I want to flee that danger in search of power. Okay. If the power starts getting taken away, I'm going to cling to whatever power I've got. And if it gets taken away enough, I'm going to fight to get that power back, because I do not want to move into a total loss of power. Okay. You could call this emptiness being a lack of validation, a lack of admiration, recognition, or belonging. Okay, that feels dangerous to me. Again, I feel at a loss of power if I'm not getting validation. So I flee that in search of validation. When I get the validation, I cling to it. If I lose the validation, I'll fight for it back, because I do not want to drop into invisibility and oblivion. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So these are our main obsessions, whether it be I seek power or I seek validation. And there's so many things we seek, okay? But to stay on the victim-persecutor role, those are the two main things they're seeking. The persecutor seeks power. The victim seeks validation. Clear enough?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they're going to flee, fight, search, or cling to whatever they're searching for, okay? So now, this polarity actually happens in the body, okay? So just to go back, what I forgot to say is this whole polarity is driven by fear, because it's driven by emptiness. We fear emptiness. We fear non-existence. We fear loss of control. So we are on this polarity completely driven by fear, okay? So where does fear live? In our head. Yes, you can feel fear in your body. Yes, you can feel fear like an emotion, but fear is really centered in the head region because it is about self-preservation, okay? The head is oriented towards self, ego. It's using perception to navigate safety, danger. It's always constantly trying to move away from danger, so it's constantly driven by fear, okay? You could say that's our reptilian brain, all right? Clear enough? This is very, very, very simplified, okay?
So it's the whole brain?
Well, I'm saying, let's say the reptilian brain here,
okay?
Okay, because we can open up the frontal lobe, we can open up whole brain experiences, and we move out of that fear-driven function, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But let's say reptilian brain, it is focused on self, it's based upon navigation, perception, and it's about self-preservation. It's driven by fear. It's constantly navigating danger, right? Now, when we move down into the heart center, this is all about relationship. It's relationship oriented, and its function is to connect. Why is it connecting? To validate itself. Do I exist? Do I exist? Do I exist? And it's constantly seeking love, okay, and belonging, all right? Like Enneagram stuff, let's say, all right? Now, we teach this all in a little bit in module 1, a lot in module 2. So the victim is heart-centered. It's obsessed with validation. It's always functioning through connection, feelings, emotions, okay? And it always wants to be in relationship, all right? Which is why a victim can create codependency, for example, right? It can cling. Or rebel and say, I suddenly want to be independent, okay? The body center, like the lower body centers, I'm saying stomach, groin, it is focused on environment or community. It's all about movement and action, okay? It is driven by the need to control, okay? So it is power hungry, all right? This is where our anger center is. The anger allows us to move, fight, dominate, and control, all right? So one thing that happens is this body center, like it's represented, I'm representing it by the sword for power, control, anger, aggression. This gets equated with masculinity. The heart center gets equated with femininity. All right, nurturing, connection, relationship, love, etc. Okay, so one thing that's happened over the thousands of years is this illusion of patriarchy and matriarchy, masculine and feminine, where we've put ourselves in these boxes to say men are the fighters and the providers and the survivors, and women are the nurturers and the keepers, etc. And so women get equated with heart, men get equated with body or sword. And then in the last while, we've started to flip these roles with the rise of feminism, and recently with the rise of beta males, men trying to become more nurturing and compassionate. What they're doing is the women are sacrificing the heart and the men are sacrificing the sword, and they're trying to do this flip exchange. I'm just adding that in for context, yeah? Okay. Now, what's happening is, ideally, we want all three to work together, where the head can function through perception and navigation, the heart can function through connection, and the body can function through movement and action. Okay, what happens though when we're on the victim-persecutor cycle is one tries to dominate the other, and it joins forces with the brain because it's instilling fear in both. It's putting fear into connection, and it's putting fear into action. Is this making sense what I'm saying? Okay. So how does the victim work? Well, the victim cuts itself off from the power center. Okay. This means the victim is less prone to take action, and it's joining up feelings with fear, feelings with ideology. So it's measuring itself through validation. Okay. What's happening is, because the victim is cutting off its power, the head is compensating for that. Okay, so it's trying to think everything true. It's over navigating danger, and it's holding the heart fragile, saying, don't use power because you might lose your heart. Okay, how am I doing with it? I mean, just ask me if you have questions here.
Sounds good.
Okay, so
yeah.
Because it's not in touch with power, it doesn't know. This is a threat to both the heart and the brain. And the brain is telling the heart, that power center is a threat to you. So victims will not access that. They'll dip down into it and then they'll get scared. So what they're having is, when they try to empower themselves, it's a false sense of empowerment because it's happening up in their head, not actually down here. Because they've trained themselves that if we go down here, the heart will die, basically. Again, it's like either or. So they're on a polarity where they're fleeing from power or fighting against power because they want to preserve their heart, their sense of validation, okay? They choose validation over power. Validation comes first. So how do they do that? They seek external validation in order to validate themselves, okay? Once they can get that validation, they'll feel internally empowered, okay? So that feeds their internal sense of power, but that's actually just happening in the head. But they will never use or execute the power, because when they do that, they feel like they lose their heart. This is why they won't exercise authority, because they think full authority means they might have to be cruel and heartless. So they won't do it. They'll choose to forfeit power in order to preserve the heart. And then they feel like they're victims again. The whole problem behind this is that the victim is completely cut off from internal validation. The victim actually possesses internal power because they can tolerate all kinds of victimization and still stay in the game and stay strong. they will not use power because they'll feel they'll lose their whole sense of self because they have no sense of self. So we're resuming here, we're back. So as I was saying, the victim will never use power or execute power because it is afraid that it makes an exchange, power for heart. So it'll totally lose its sense of validation. So, and it will become heartless. So what we may think that victims lack power. They actually contain power. They just refuse to use the power. Mm-hmm. What they really lack is internal validation. A victim is not able to validate themselves from themselves. They are too dependent on external validation. When they are so dependent on external validation, this is why they can't execute power or authority, because they're afraid that somebody won't like them. Okay? To be very, 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 very simple. Mm-hmm. What they choose to do then is forfeit that power and tolerate being victimized. It is less sufferable. Okay? They will find it insufferable to be considered a heartless persecutor. Okay? Because that's exactly what they do not want to be. How are you guys doing with that?
Good.
Any questions? So earlier you were saying something, Dieter, about, I think it was about this, not being able to what?
Yeah. So let's say I was more, if I talk about myself, I was more identifying with the heart when I was younger.
Yeah.
And then it was hard. And I thought I'd do it from a, let's say, from a position of wisdom, like mm-hmm. you were mentioning, like Jesus-like, yeah. So I'm not fighting back because it's let's say I was thinking it's stupid to fight back because I'm continuing the fight. So yeah. I don't fight back. And then third parties were telling me you're weak, or you at least resemble being weak. Mm-hmm. And that was the hardest part for me because I knew I could fight back, but I didn't want to. Or maybe I was thinking I can and I couldn't at the time. So yeah, you know?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So what I'll have to say there is sometimes we can trick ourselves mm-hmm. into thinking, oh, I won't fight, I will disengage. And what it actually is, it's using apathy or mm-hmm. indifference, which can make us think like I'm taking the higher ground or the higher road, but what I'm really doing is cutting myself off still from the power, saying I'm choosing the heart, and then it can actually start closing the heart as well to say, well, fuck them, I don't care, they don't matter.
Yeah.
Right? That's actually apathy. That is a shield. Okay. In other webinars, we talk about indifference, apathy, and then also numbness and denial. Okay. So any of those four shields can also keep us into victimhood, right? Where we say, I won't engage. It's just 4 ways to say, I will not engage in executing power. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's what a victim will do. This is why you'll see victims, one way they use power, so to speak, is to blame, but they're trying to get the validation. Do you see how I'm a victim? Do you see how he picks on me? Right? Mm-hmm. And I'm so angry and angry and angry and no more, no more, no more. That's them fighting the power, but they will not use power. They flee from that, okay? Mm-hmm. Another way they flee is they'll say, well, fuck it, I don't care. They get apathetic or indifferent, and they'll go escape in search of something else or somebody else. Mm-hmm. Say, I'll have nothing to do with them anymore. And then they'll validate themselves. Do you see how heroic I am? Because I don't engage in the fight. Do you like me? Do you like me? Do you like me? I'm a good person. I'm a good person. I'm a good person, right? I don't fight back. So that's false empowerment, okay? Did I lose you guys again?
No.
Okay, good. Let me move on to persecutor, because it's quite exactly the opposite. So here we have the persecutor, again, head, heart, body. But now what happens with the persecutor is they disconnect from the heart, all right? And they're joining up the brain and the body, the sword center, the body center together. So what's happening here then is they, because they're cutting out the need for validation, they're saying, no, if I seek validation, that will make me weak and vulnerable and I'll lose power. So they constantly fear. They're acting from fear with validation, okay? Whereas the victim is treating power with fear. The persecutor is treating heartfelt connection with fear, okay? It's one place they won't go. Now, I can expand on that a little bit more, because you can say, well, what about the narcissist persecutor? You know, and we can explain that. So the persecutor is obsessed with action, strategy, and control, and it's cut off from compassion. Okay, this is why a persecutor can make executive decisions and not feel bad about it. For example, I can fire you and just say, you're fired, you're done. And you'll say, well, that's mean. Why don't you? It's like, I don't care. Business is business. Okay, if that, for example, the victim will say, well, that's a persecutor. But the persecutor says, absolutely not. I'm just cutting the weakest link. Because they're not engaging with the compassion, it makes it easier to do, for example. How are you guys doing with this? You can feel free to disagree.
I totally disagree. I'm just saying it.
Yeah, okay, fine. All right. So, this is why persecutors refuse to move into vulnerability, for example. Okay, let's look at their polarity. They are seeking power, and when they have the power, they're going to cling to it. All right? If they start losing power, they're going to fight against being vulnerable. They're going to flee from being vulnerable. They're going to fight against, like, putting down their defenses and letting you in. This is why, you know, it takes a lot for them to trust, for example. Okay, and then when they'll feel so weak if they've gained your trust and you fight back on them and take advantage of them. Okay, they've got to be in control, because as soon as they let their guard down, open their heart, they're suddenly out of control. They've lost control. Now they become victim. Do you understand? So they fight very hard not to be victimized. Okay, why is this? So they're choosing power over validation. What they do is they will use external power. I want power over you. That means I have power within myself. So they use external power to feed internal power. When they have power, that validates them. Okay? What they will not do is seek validation to be validated. That's what they will never do. Just like the victim will never seek power to use power, okay? They will never use, they seek validation in order to feel empowered. The persecutor seeks power in order to feel validated. So this is why, you know, you can have a tyrant that says, love me, love me, love me, but they're not saying approve of me. They're saying, love me because how powerful I am, okay? Mm-hmm. If they lose all that power, then they could be taken advantage of, they could be conquered, they cease to exist, okay? So they will not show weakness because that risks losing all the power, okay? Now, the other thing is, so what they feel is, if I go seek approval for approval's sake, if I seek approval just to feel, you know, inwardly validated, that means I'm weak. I will not be vulnerable, okay? That's for pussies, okay? So this is why the bully will say, oh, why would you care if everybody likes you in the class? I don't care if everybody likes me in the class because I'm already confident in myself, okay? So the one thing a persecutor does possess is an internal sense of validation. They do possess it. What they do not possess, what they're completely cut off from, is internal power. That sounds weird. You'd think, why? Somebody's so powerful, so powerful, so powerful. Of course they think that. They don't quite believe they're powerful enough. They're clinging to this power. So the one thing they're missing is a sense of internal power. Same with the victim. The one thing they're missing is a sense of internal validation. This is why they're constantly oriented towards validation. And this is why the persecutor is constantly oriented towards power. So this becomes a bit like a hall of mirrors. Like, what? I thought victims were powerless. No, they contain power. What they lack is interior validation. I thought persecutors were heartless. No, 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 no. They're not heartless. They lack interior power. What's it like to hear those statements?
Fascinating. I'm writing it down.
Yeah. If we start to realize this, it becomes easier to begin reconciling. It becomes easier to develop empathy. All right? Because if we keep believing the myth that the persecutor is heartless and has no heart, no, it's that they choose not to use the heart. If we keep thinking the victim is weak and powerless, right, we'll keep persecuting them. It's not that they lack power, it's that they have chosen not to use power, okay? That's the difference. Questions or comments there? And I'll return to that in a moment. Okay.
Just to get it right, Troy. So the persecutor lacks internal power. But has what? Heart?
They do have a sense of internal validation.
Validation. So validation.
Yeah. Okay. They don't seek validation outright. Once they have power, they'll get external validation, but the one thing they will never do is ask for external validation in order to validate themselves. They have already a sense of self. Okay? Mm-hmm. The victim does possess power, it just will not use the power. What they lack is a sense of self. So they're constantly asking, am I right? Do I belong? Please validate me, because they have no sense of self. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. And that makes sense because the victim is, you know, the closest to pure innocence, which is the closest to source, where there is no identity and no ego. So there is no self. Right. So how do we reconcile these? First, we're building resilience in a person. All right. Now, we learned this in EED Module 1, and we've talked about it in other webinars. How do you circulate resilience throughout? Okay, so we get them in touch with an essential quality. What that does is it gets them into a more calm place, which neutralizes fears, and they're more into a source experience, meaning my infinite, permanent, timeless self, and I'm okay. There's nowhere to go, nothing to be, nothing to do. All right. And the most common essential qualities are peace, limitlessness, unity, and love. Okay. So any of those qualities work. We get that circulating and they'll start to feel resilient within themselves and they'll have a sense of well-being. Therefore, they're already less controlled by ego. And they're more into essence. Now, what we can do is we can start doing a mini vertical loop between these centers, okay? So for example, we can work the lower body. Now, this is something you can do for yourself. If you are oriented towards the heart center, then what you can do is focus on your heart center. What is the essential quality there? Or what's the simple strength of the heart, all right? Then what you can do is you can send that strength over to the lower body and see how it receives it. So what we're doing is a loop of give and receive. The body might reject it a few times, saying, no, I don't want that, I don't want that. So you just keep charging up the heart and send it over and see how it's received. If it's completely rejected, switch over and start creating a relationship with your power center. Now, people who are very heart-centered may have a problem with anger. And so one of the things I'm usually doing is I'm working through creating a relationship to anger, because that's a doorway into their power center. And the heart is usually constantly refusing anger because it thinks it's destructive and it's going to cut off relationships, okay? But if we get behind anger as just the pure sensation, we can start to find what the strength is. So forget anger, the label and judgment of anger, and get into the sensation of it. Then the person could say, wow, I feel adrenaline, I feel movement, I feel charged up, I feel strong, I feel confident, I feel passionate. It could be, say, for example, any of those things. So then we identify that as an essential strength of theirs. So let's say it's passion. So then it can send up that strength to the heart and see how the heart receives it. Okay. Eventually, we can start creating a cross exchange where both centers are giving and receiving to each other. Therefore, they start understanding the function of each other because they're appreciating each other's strengths. Okay, so we work this in detail in the Reconciling Conflicts course, where you're actually reconciling body centers with each other. It's just a simple rebalancing, okay? So that the power center believes that when the heart is dominant, we're going to become too vulnerable and we're going to get killed. The brain will believe that when the heart is dominant, we're going to be too vulnerable and it's not safe. Okay? Are you guys still there, or did I get cut off?
No, you're here. You're here.
Okay, great. Okay, because you're so still. I'm like, oh, my
Just thinking.
Yeah, and I'm noticing we're going a little overtime, but if you guys can stay, then that's great. So then we can also do this between the heart and the head, okay? Again, what's the strength of the heart? Send it to the head. Does the head receive it? If it refuses, charge up the heart, send it back, send it over a few times. If that doesn't work, go into what's the strength of the head, okay? And that could be, well, see, let's say for victims, the head is working overtime on trying to be in control of everything, okay? It's trying to do the work of the stomach, all right? So, and it's resenting the heart, thinking if the heart, takes over, then we're out of control and we're in danger, okay? But if the head realizes, okay, so its strength is focus, clarity, and it can send focus and clarity to the heart, all right? And then the heart is sending over connection, generosity, radiance, right? Then that might enhance the clarity. So then it's saying, oh, so if I'm not spending so much time trying to control everything and I just create clarity, I'll see if the heart becomes in danger, but I don't have to stop the heart before it does its work. See, the brain is usually stopping the heart. That's when, let's say, the brain is paired with the power center. They're both stopping the heart because they're in anticipation of danger. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. When they realize the strength of the heart, they both can start relaxing and say, let the heart do its work. I'll take control when needed. The brain will let me know when we're in danger. Okay, we can keep the channels open for connection, which creates unity, okay, which actually starts to neutralize danger. And when there's unity, there's nothing to really protect anymore. Okay, and if there's a problem, the brain will see it, the sword can step in, and the heart can still maintain relationships. So it becomes a rebalancing, all right? But what we're doing when we're reconciling centers together is we're having each center recognize the strength of the other and allowing them to receive the strengths of the other while giving strengths to each other, okay? So it's making an exchange of information so that there are no blockages between them. How are you guys doing with that?
Mhm.
It's making each center resilient to itself so that they're not protecting one from the other or protecting themselves from each other. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
When I've done this, it's tempered toxic masculinity, it's tempered femininity and overdrive. It creates a balance between the two so that, for example, with toxic masculinity, they can relax into their power. They don't have to cling to it so much. They can afford to open their heart, which actually makes them more powerful. And what they've done is they've chosen not to constantly have the sword at the ready, but they put the sword to the side and they're alert, aware, connected, where they can pull the sword out at any time, but they don't have to cling to it, okay? With, let's say, overactivated femininity, or let's say femininity masquerading as masculine, meaning like feminism in overdrive, where they're cutting themselves even off from their own ability to nurture or connect. Or let's say toxic victimhood, constantly a victim. When they start getting in touch with their power center, it gets tempered by the heart. So the two start balancing each other. They're less in fear of themselves. They are less in fear of themselves. And they're less dependent on approval. And they become okay with creating boundaries or saying no. And it doesn't mean that it costs them their life, because they've returned to a resilience within themselves and they don't resort to apathy or indifference, all right? They actually realize that boundaries become okay. Either opening or closing the boundary does not mean they're cut off from relationship. So they can have a different perception of what relationship means. How is this sounding? So it's creating a more healthy balance on all levels. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on.
Mm.
So it is a process of forgiveness. I wanted to, because I'm saying we're moving towards the end of a victim cycle, the end phase is always forgiveness. Now, there's two ingredients to forgiveness. It's acceptance and resilience. Usually the persecutor will ask for forgiveness first. Okay, the victim is never really going to offer forgiveness to a persecutor outright. Okay, if it happens, great, but because the persecutor is coming to the end of their own cycle, they're asking for forgiveness. They're ready to drop. Sometimes the persecutor will ask for forgiveness just to manipulate the victim. That means they're not ready. A persecutor is ready when they totally accept the victim at the same level of the victim. Okay, that means they're letting go of power. They're not using power as a status anymore. They're actually dropping the power and saying, I accept you for who you are, victim, and please forgive me. They're dropping to the level of the victim, so to speak. The victim will find difficulty in accepting the persecutor, like to accept them back, because this is an opportunity for revenge or retaliation, or they don't trust the persecutor and they're still clinging to victimhood. You're just doing this to victimize me all over again. I've heard you say I'm sorry so many times and you never really were. Okay? They will not be able to distinguish a true apology from, let's say, a narcissistic or fake apology or a manipulation. Okay? true forgiveness begins by accepting the other person first, then asking for forgiveness. And then when they are being given the forgiveness, they need to accept the forgiveness. Okay, and then they become accepted by the other person. So the way it works is, I accept you, please forgive me. Then you say, I forgive you, and I accept that forgiveness. And then you say, and I accept you. That's what starts creating the unity. Each one of those steps is very difficult for both people. This is why a reconciliation process takes a long time, okay? Because if neither are resilient, there will not be trust, okay? The forgiveness loop closes by each person forgiving and accepting themselves, okay? There's more to add on that. Because actually the victim has a harder time doing this because they've only gone halfway through the cycle. The way they finish their other half is it's internalized. If they forgive their persecutor and let them go, then the victim will start persecuting themselves, saying, why were you the victim? Why are you taking advantage? They have to forgive their own inner persecution and let that go too. So the victim actually has more work to do, okay? So in light of that, do not rush to forgive. Do not rush to take revenge or retaliate. What we're best to do is start working on our own inner resilience and start reconciling our power and heart centers, okay? So that we can temporarily step out of that cycle to see what's really going on.
Okay, personally, so I was finding it internally, where I think I even got a tool to work with myself. And externally, you were saying one thing that is like, okay, I don't recall it right now, but it's like, if we finish the victim cycle and are about to become a persecutor, we can forgive at that point, but when I forgive at that point, I sometimes feel like it would be a stupid thing to do, at least like full forgiveness, because they will just start persecuting
That's
again.
right. That means you're not ready to forgive. Now,
yeah, because I have this feeling, or maybe it's an illusion, I forgave before, but then they just use that against me. So it's like, okay, come on, what's that?
Exactly. This is why it makes it extremely hard, all right? And it is a leap of faith to do that forgiveness. And this is why it takes a lot of resilience. It's a huge risk, right?
It takes as much resilience as it would take to overcome the next step in the heart.
Yeah.
Basically.
Now, and on that, we have a choice. So if I'm not ready to forgive, then I have another choice. Well, then I can retaliate. But know that now when I'm retaliating, I am now a persecutor, and I need to accept that within myself, that now I'm taking on a role of persecutor. What's very bad is when we sit in this space of, I will not forgive and I will not be a persecutor. And it's this place of denial. And that's where a lot of people are right now, is this persecutor in denial, the veiled victim, okay? And this is actually what I see happening globally with the politics. You have all these insufferable victims that are pretending to be warriors. They'll call themselves social justice warriors, but they're throwing out these daggers of persecution, but they're not owning up to it. They're not owning up that they are persecutors. They're saying, I was forced into this because of him and him and him and him. That's still victim mentality. That's the victim just putting the toe over the line to the persecutor, but they will not forgive and they will not accept that they are becoming a persecutor. I find that a very dangerous place to be. That's where it's so important to build resilience within them, so that then they can start building acceptance of self, which then they can build acceptance of the other. Thoughts or comments there?
I'm still missing the point why it's a very bad place to be, or worse than other places to be.
Because then it's not moving anywhere on the cycle.
Yeah.
It's just stuck on that line.
So
And it's
like,
aggravating victimhood, and it's holding up persecutors ready to move on. So they're holding up the whole thing. And then it's just going to blow, blow, blow. And what will happen is the victim will cross the line and become a very extreme persecutor in the name of justice. Okay.
So if you can't forgive, if you can't find the resilience, it's better to move on slowly, and persecute a little bit.
Well, have compassion for yourself that you are rebalancing the scales. If you do this with awareness, you can actually cycle through it faster. Okay. In fact, we need to experience that. We need to experience that cycle many, many, many times. We need to get to know both roles. We can't just say, I'm not going to play the game at all and I'm going to get off it before I'm playing it. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm not advocating is just keep retaliating. What I'm saying is know what you're doing and accept what you're doing. Okay. This might make more sense when I go through these little points here. If you're not ready to forgive, don't forgive. But also, don't rush into retaliation. What I'm saying is work on yourself. Do this reconciliation work between your heart and power centers, okay? That is the one thing we can do. Because if we forgive for validation's sake, like, look at me, I took the high road and I forgave him, okay? We're returning to victimhood because we're still seeking that validation. We're using forgiveness to get the validation. Okay, it's not true forgiveness. If we forgive to avoid using power and just submit, we're returning to victimhood, meaning, oh, I forgive you, okay, fine, just to get you off my back so we can get back into a safe situation, okay? I'm returning to victimhood. That's not true forgiveness either. Victims will do this a lot. And then they'll say, yes, my oppressor said, I'm sorry, I forgave you. I'm sorry, I forgave you, but you victimized me again and again. It's probably because they were doing one of these two things. Accepting the apology to avoid confrontation, or accepting the apology to look like a good person. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. Victims don't like to hear that, by the way. If we then choose to retaliate, to unleash our power, we've become a persecutor and we're creating another victim out of revenge. Our revenge creates another victim. That means we are a persecutor now on the other half of the cycle. Okay, we've created a victim. Okay, if we retaliate for justice and recognition, being the social justice warrior, and I'm bringing down the system because it's not right, but we're doing it for validation. Look at the hero, look at me. We have become a persecutor because we're using validation for power. Okay, we're doing what a persecutor does. Okay, I'm using the power and I'm getting the validation for it, or I'm using power to gain my validation. That's what persecutors do. Okay. So heroism and justice, okay, is a form of persecution. Even though, and this is where a lot of victims will go, when they cross the persecutor line, they do it in the name of justice and heroism, and then they don't realize they're actually a persecutor and a tyrant. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. They're not breaking the cycle. Here's the other option. If we withhold forgiveness, so if somebody asks us, please forgive me, and I'll say, no. That's, if it's coming from a place of fear and stubbornness, like, no, 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 I will not let you go. I will either make you pay, or I'm going to just keep holding and holding and holding. I'm actually now becoming a persecutor because by withholding forgiveness, I now hold power over you and I take you prisoner. This happens a lot. When the victim is given the opportunity to forgive, they'll either do any of these four things or they will just withhold forgiveness altogether. When it's coming from fearful stubbornness, they become the persecutor and hold the other person prisoner. If they're saying it's not wise to forgive yet, that's different. Then they can say, well, no, I'm not forgiving you. I'm still a victim here. You're still victimizing me, right? So, I mean, that stuff has to be worked out. But when it comes down to I withhold because I can, that's actually persecution. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I want to really underline here, there is no obligation to forgive or retaliate. Take a moment to work on reconciling oneself before taking action on forgiveness or retaliation. Okay, so in summary, we've said this. Victims are perceived as powerless. But that's not true. They just refuse to use power because they lack internal validation. Okay, they use validation to validate themselves. They see power and control as cruel and heartless, so therefore they forfeit power. Okay, persecutors are perceived as heartless, but that's not true. They just refuse to use their heart because they lack internal power. If they have internal power, they'll freely open their heart. Okay. But they see love and connection as weak and vulnerable, therefore they choose to forfeit the heart and they choose power instead, okay? So what that means is victims and persecutors are actually shadows of each other. This is why they are intricately bound. Victims contain the internal power a persecutor desires. Think about it. A victim can tolerate and withstand constant abuse and still survive, still be there. They have power, okay? The persecutor does not have that. The persecutors contain the internal validation of victim desires. A persecutor does not need approval. They just are. And that's the one thing a victim lacks, is that ability to love or approve themselves. They constantly need to check out there. Am I good enough? Is this making sense what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a cross exchange. So think about it this way. The persecutor, when they persecute a victim enough that the victim suddenly says, fine, it's not that they claim their power, it's that they claim themselves. I validate myself, therefore I don't need to be persecuted anymore. Or when the victim, baits the persecutor enough, the persecutor says, I don't need you to understand my own power within. Okay, that's when they can start dissolving the cycle. We are constantly toggling between victim and persecutor because we are pursuing love and control daily. We're juggling between the two. We don't realize that we play both roles. We just prefer to identify with one or the other, okay? But we actually are playing both roles, and we're constantly juggling that. So the sooner we can reconcile our own internal victim-persecutor cycle, the sooner we can start moving into a reconciliation externally. So the first step is to accept that we are both the victim and the persecutor without shame or punishment. Then we can begin breaking the cycle by reconciling our own heart and power centers. And as I explained before, just have them give and receive strengths back and forth to each other so they understand how they work together, how they're intricately connected. It's not either or. How are you guys doing with this information? What sums it up for you?
Yeah, this internal reconciliation process is something I'm going to use, because I often feel like I'm lacking movement, I'm lacking action, I'm lacking doing things, and like refraining from going into action, because I don't know, things will happen. Refraining from executing control, like taking a sense of control over things in my life, because I feel if I do it, I'm heartless, like that. I feel that if I do that, I will forget something. It feels like I will forget something very important, and it will, whatever I will do, it will be meaningless. This is how it feels, and I can see that the reconciliation of my heart and power center, my illusion there, like meditating on it and doing the give and receive. And
Great. Oh, I forgot to change this. That was from last webinar. I tried out a test run for a little.
Now we see it, Troy. Before that, it was invisible.
Yeah. So in summary for you, Dieter, what you're taking away.
It's fascinating. I love the slides. I love how you present it. It seems absolutely logic to me. Now so it's really a big topic. You see it everywhere. And while you were explaining it, there was a constant movie in my head. I had, I think, thousands of situations where one or the other played out.
That's right.
It was fascinating. It was really fascinating, and it explains a lot. I'm really looking forward to be able to exercise or practice that reconciliation process.
Yes.
For me, myself, but also in working with my coaches.
Yes. So what I will say is, this is where you learn it. The Reconciling Conflict course that's coming in December. Also, you get introduced to the ideas of polarities in Module 2. But Module 1 sets up the resilience. I know, Dieter, you've taken the Module 1. Paul, you've taken them all. And this is for the benefit of those listening to the recording. Reconciliation is not an easy process. Like we're saying, it's very intricate, it's very complicated, it's very sticky, right? So we do a whole 3-day training around that. And in fact, I may need to add a second training just on the forgiveness cycle itself. But it is a fascinating territory to go through. And it is absolutely possible to do these reconciliations, but it takes a sharp facilitator's mind to recognize, when are we moving back on the cycle? When are we dropping out of the cycle? And what EED does is it toggles back and forth. Let's play in the cycle a little bit. Let's drop out into essence. Go back in and drop out until we don't need to cling to that cycle, which means the full reconciliation happens when we're ready to drop both roles. And that's basically what we're learning here in the Reconciling Conflict course. So we have Module 1 coming up in Munich in September, and also in November. We have it coming up in Paris in October. So those are 3 opportunities to get the groundwork in order to be able to reconcile conflicts, because it requires Module 1. And then we have the new course coming out with the leadership and team dynamics. And the next webinar, September 4th, deals with team dynamics. How is EED working with teams? Okay. So if you're interested in working with team dynamics, come to Frankfurt at the end of September. And that's the first rollout of that course. And for those listening to the recording, visit our website, visit our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube channel, or simply email me at info@essence-dynamics.com for more information. Visit the website, essence-dynamics.com, and Facebook, Twitter, @EE-Dynamics. And that's our YouTube channel as well. Thank you, everybody, for participating. If you guys have Any further questions, Dieter and Paul, just stick around. I will now stop the recording, and we can chat after if you wish. Thank you everyone for listening, and come join us in September for the next webinar. Thank you so much, everybody.